Right? Now can we start, right?
I think so. It's the time.
Okay. Okay. Dear colleagues and dear participants, welcome to our webinar. Okay, recording is in progress. Welcome to our webinar hosted by our European Union Research Center, ATAUM. First of all, I'd like to inform you that our webinar will be broadcast live on YouTube channel, our YouTube channel. If you know someone that could not join the Zoom due to the participant limit, they would follow us through YouTube. All right, as you know, the Antalya Diplomacy Forum hosted by Foreign Minister Mevlüt Çavuşoğlu was held last week in Antalya, Patara, the first parliament of the world, where the tradition of seeking solutions and problems by talking and negotiating had begun. A sentence uttered by Çavuşoğlu impressed all the participants. He said, "Diplomacy begins in the minds." Yes, it's a sentence emphasizing the importance of diplomacy in this new century, where we need to solve the problems by talking and negotiating against different challenges we face today, like COVID. So we should all emphasize international cooperation, not competitiveness in the century, and that we could not find solutions to the problems facing humanity without acting together. Yes, diplomacy is a highly codified and choreographed from communication between nation states. However, the digital revolution has made social media an indispensable part of the 21st century diplomacy. Drawing from real-life examples, this lecture, our webinar entitled Diplomacy in the Age of Social Media, Lessons from a European Foreign Service, will map what diplomacy looks like today and how governments and individual government officials can communicate effectively in the new digital world. I'd like to introduce Mr. Sysio briefly. Timo Sysio currently serves as a Team Finland coordinator at the Embassy of Finland in Ankara. He is in charge of communications and country branding. He has previously worked in Unit for Northern Europe and the Consular Service of the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has been appointed as the Press and Cultural Consular at the Embassy of Finland in Beijing as of August 2021. Mr. Sysio is also a PhD candidate at the National University of Singapore, and his research focuses on the urban spatiality of interstate diplomacy. He earned his master's and bachelor's degrees from University of Hong Kong. Now, I'd like to ask our center's director, Dr. İlke Göçmen, for his opening remarks. The Zoom floor is yours, Dr. Göçmen, please.
Thank you, Pırıl Hanım. A very short opening speech this will be. So, dear excellencies, dear colleagues, dear students, and dear guests, I would like to welcome you all as Ankara University European Union Research Center for today's event. Our research center was established in 1987 in a year when Turkey applied for European Union membership. Since then, in order to contribute to Turkey's European Union membership process, we have been organizing certificate programs, making research, publishing works, and organizing cultural and scientific events in relation to the European Union. Today, we are honored to have Mr. Timo Sysio with us. Sorry for my pronunciation, who is Team Finland coordinator at the Embassy of Finland in Ankara, to give a webinar titled Diplomacy in the Age of Social Media, Lessons from a European Foreign Service. In this regard, we would like to thank the Embassy of Finland in Ankara for their cooperation in organizing today's event. I wish you a pleasant webinar, to which I am also looking forward to. So thank you a lot.
Yes. We thank to Dr. Göçmen for his kind speech. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Sysio to start his very interesting and instructive presentation. By the way, I'd like to add something. If you have any questions, you may raise your hand and ask your questions, or you can write it to the chat as well. However, if possible, we would like to collect all questions at the end and ask them to Mr. Sysio at the end of his lecture in order not to interrupt him during his presentation, of course. And the Zoom floor is yours, Mr. Sysio, please.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pırıl. And thank you for the introduction also, Dr. Yilke. Let me just start the presentation. I hope you can see it now.
Yeah.
Good. So today I'll be talking about diplomacy in the age of social media. And I'll start by a short introduction on why I'm talking about this topic today, and also about what we're actually going to do within the next about an hour. It won't be exactly 90 minutes. I'll try to keep it shorter than that because I know that it's Friday afternoon for you, and for me it's Friday evening. I'm today actually in Hong Kong on holiday. This is my day 21 in quarantine in a hotel, so I look a little bit shabby. My apologies for that. But I'll be out tomorrow, so this is kind of the celebration of the last night as well in quarantine. Okay, so let's start with a short introduction. Ms. Pırıl kindly also already introduced me, but I am indeed working as a career diplomat at the Finnish Foreign Service. For the last 2 years, I've been in Ankara, Turkey. So many of my examples today will be about Turkey, but also I've worked at the Finnish Embassy in Beijing before, and I'm going there to be in charge of media and communications as of August 2021. In addition to my daytime work, I also do my PhD on a part-time basis, and my topic is urban spatiality of diplomacy. So that's also one reason why I'm interested in diplomacy as a research area beyond profession as well. And today I'll be talking about diplomatic communication. I'll start with a very, very short introduction of diplomacy. After that, I'll go to communication itself. I'll talk about especially about social media communication in diplomacy and give some practical examples of diplomatic communication. And then after that, I give some examples on how to communicate effectively in diplomacy and maybe also beyond diplomacy based on my experience and based on the lessons that I've received in the Foreign Service. So let's start with diplomacy, a very, very short history and introduction. There are many definitions of diplomacy, the word itself, but I want to start by defining it so that we all know what we're going to talk about today. Ernest Zatov, a British scholar and diplomat, in 1917 wrote a book called The Practice of Diplomacy. It is one of the oldest books about diplomatic protocol, and I think his definition of diplomacy still stands today. So what he wrote back in 1917 was that diplomacy is the application of intelligence and tact to the conduct of official relations between governments of independent states. There are many similar definitions. For example, diplomacy being the conduct of relations between sovereign states, and representation and governing among recognized qualities. I guess I have a third definition here because diplomacy has changed over time. Today, it's not only about independent states, but we have more and more actors beyond just nation states practicing diplomacy. We have the European Union, United Nations, all kinds of intergovernmental organizations. And beyond that, also we have diplomacy from below, for example, city-to-city diplomacy. Mayor of Istanbul, Mayor İmamoğlu, has met many other mayors, for example, Helsinki mayor as well. This year, our capital city, Helsinki, will be partnering with Beijing to be actually the main guest of Beijing Design Week. So actually, cities are practicing what used to be the sole performance of nation states. And then if we see where diplomacy comes from, I also have a short definition here of the background of the word itself. Diplomacy, the word derives its origins from ancient Greek, from the word diploma, which means an object folded in two. And why is it that? Well, you know, over time in history, kings and rulers and presidents have always sent envoys, people to carry on messages. And back in the day, they used to be folded in two. So they were actually pieces of paper, messages from one kingdom or one king to another, usually. And that was the first form of diplomacy, so to speak. It was people carrying messages from one king to another, or one ruler to another. And that's where today's diplomacy comes from. So a short history on it. Diplomacy oftentimes is defined to have begun in ancient Greek city-states. I would say that actually there has been diplomacy for as long as we have had political units. Back when we had small villages in the Near East, those villages also practiced communication or practiced relations with one another. And then in Greek city-states, in these places and in these states that many of them are actually situated in today's Turkey, rulers would send envoys to each other to discuss issues of war and peace, to agree on common issues and common interests and whatnot. And that's how diplomacy somehow began. So it was carrying these, what we can call diplomas, from one ruler to another. Then over time, kings and states saw that, you know, we have so many issues to discuss that we can't always just send someone over when there's an issue. And in the late medieval period, early Renaissance period, especially in Italy, countries or states started to send permanent diplomats. So people who would be stationed in another court, in another state. And that's how residential diplomacy started. So diplomats wouldn't only always go for a trip, but they would actually stay for a longer period in another court. And that was also good because in that way they could spy on the foreign ruler and send messages back home telling what's actually happening in the foreign court. And then when this practice became more formalized, we saw the age of classical European diplomacy, especially during the time of Louis XIV, the Sun King, in the 17th century. Then after the Napoleonic Wars in 1814, 1815, the rulers and the royal families of Europe convened in Vienna to discuss an international code of conduct. And that's somehow how diplomatic protocol was born. We had the two world wars then. After the First World War, we had the League of Nations. After the Second World War, we saw the rise of the United Nations. And during this increasing time of international cooperation, finally countries agreed on the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. And this somehow codified the diplomatic protocol, diplomatic practices, and also diplomatic communication, which is something that we'll be talking about today. And I would argue that we still today live in this age of Vienna Convention in diplomacy. But of course, this is a very short history and a short introduction, and it also means that it's a very Western-centric one. Diplomacy has existed, as I said, in various forms in all kinds of political communities, also beyond the West. We have many examples for example, from ancient China of states sending tributary missions to the Chinese emperor and whatnot. We have very interesting examples from the Ottoman court and Istanbul. So I'm not denying them. I just wanted to give a very short and, my apologies, very Western-centric introduction to the topic. But then let's move to the main issue of today. Today, I'll be talking about diplomacy in the age of social media. And more precisely, I'll be talking about diplomatic communication and how it has changed, and maybe how it's still similar to what it was back in the day. Communication. What is communication? The word itself comes from Latin, communicare, which means to share. Communication about sharing information, knowledge, ideas by means of speech, like we're doing today, writing, like we often do in newspaper articles, and more through electronic media as well. Of course, there's both verbal communication, the type of communication that I'm doing now when I'm communicating with you. Verbal communication, also the words that you can read from the screen. And then we have non-verbal communication, for example, smiling or showing that you're upset, or maybe communicating something through your outfit. Today, my outfit is actually very casual. This was not an intentional way of communicating anything. It was just that I have been stuck in this small room for 21 days, and this was one of the last clean shirts that I had left. And then we have internal and external communication. By internal communication, I mean the communication that we do within the organization. For example, I would send emails to my colleagues, I would give them phone calls, I would send WhatsApp messages and whatnot. And then we have external communication, something that diplomats and embassies and foreign ministries do quite a lot, for example, in the social media, communicating in Twitter, publicly, or on their Facebook site. And today we're talking mainly about external communication. And communication, I would argue, oftentimes, if not always, has some extrinsic motive, something that they want to do through communication, something that diplomats want to achieve. It's not that we communicate just because we want to communicate, but most of the times we do it for some other reasons. For diplomacy, it's to make our country better known, because when others know us better, they would listen to us more. And if they know good things about us, they might think more positively about us, which will help us in the future. So there are many kind of reasons, many kind of motives that we use to communicate, and we'll be talking about some of them today. Also, communication is something that we all do at all times. That's also true for diplomacy. I will be going to Beijing as a press secretary, but I'm not the only one who communicates at the embassy. My colleagues do it all day, every day. They communicate with other colleagues, they communicate through their own social media platforms, and they communicate even through their outfits. And then I would say that in diplomatic communication, we have two issues that we should pay attention to. One is continuity, the ritualization of diplomatic communication. And the other issue, the one that will be the main focus for today, is change, especially technological development and how it has changed diplomacy and how it has changed diplomatic communication. Let's start with continuity. So over time, diplomacy has become quite ritualized. Diplomacy itself, it's a restricted sphere of activity. What that means is that much of diplomacy happens behind closed doors. We don't exactly know how agreements are negotiated. We don't get much information about it and about the processes that happen in diplomacy. And that's true today, just like it was yesterday. Also, diplomacy is highly choreographed and coded. And what I mean when I say that diplomacy is coded, well, we have an example here. I have put up one verbal note. Verbal note is the means of diplomatic communication. It's the most traditional means. So when one country wants to say something to another country, when our embassy wants to say something to the Turkish Foreign Ministry, we would send a verbal note. And this is an example of it. I chose this one, and it's a very small text, so you can't see it maybe very clearly, but I'll explain what's inside and why I'm showing it today. But I chose this one because it's something, it's not anything specific to any individual, so it's something that I can share publicly, I feel like. The verbal note begins, I have to see it as well. The Embassy of Finland presents its compliments to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Turkey and has the honor to inform the Ministry that the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland are co-organizing blah, blah, blah, blah, blah. And then the verbal note ends. The Embassy of Finland avails itself of this opportunity to renew to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Turkey the assurance of its highest consideration. It sounds quite clumsy. It sounds very old-fashioned, and it sounds a bit odd, actually. But this is how we start all our verbal notes, and this is how we end them. And that is because it has been codified like this, and we know that we have to do it like this. Also, one time, a colleague of mine asked me, it's funny, whenever we write the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, we use plural verbs. So we say, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs are, for example, instead of is. And the colleague was saying, that's a bit funny, and I never understood it, but I do it still. And same here, I do it, and we do it because it has been a practice for the long time, from the age when, kings would call themselves we the king. So it's the same, we the foreign ministry, I guess. But it's part of the code, and there are good things about these codes. There are good things and good reasons why we have this type of communication, and it's because we have about 200 nation states today. In addition, we have a lot of non-recognized political units that practice diplomacy, and we have thousands of embassies and foreign missions. So since diplomacy is codified and coded, we know how to communicate with all these entities, and we know that no matter if we get a message from the Turkish Foreign Ministry, Chinese embassy, or an authority of a non-nation state, we would see it this way, and we would understand how to read it more easily, rather than all countries sending messages the way they want to. And also, finally, there are a lot of diplomatic signals that are part of nonverbal communication. For example, this is a recent example of diplomatic signaling. The President of the United States, President Biden, went to the UK a while ago, and he and Mrs. Biden met with the Queen of England. And there were actually quite a lot of articles about their meeting. This one is from Marie Claire, and they were asking in this article, was the Queen's outfit a secret show of support to the US? And why are they saying it? Well, if you look closely, the Queen has this brooch, a piece of jewelry that she's wearing. And it's actually, you can't see it from the picture because the picture is quite small, but she oftentimes wears this kind of jewelry, but this time she had chosen one that is in the shape of star. And many media outlets were questioning, since the American flag is called Stars and Stripes, would this be the Queen's way of signaling that she agrees with the new US administration? Well, we don't know that, but it might be. And these kind of signals we all oftentimes try to interpret in diplomacy and try to understand. And especially when it comes to more close states like the North Koreans, we would have to try to understand issues with them through this perspective and through signals that are not verbal. For example, we would often, when we look news broadcasts from DPRK, we would see, okay, who is standing next to Kim Jong-un, or who is missing from this picture, or why is he shaking hands with that and that person? And this is how diplomacy has been practiced for a long time, and I think it will be practiced in the future as well. But then also, in addition to this kind continuity. Diplomacy and the world overall is facing technological change. The Economist wrote about already 10 years ago an article about diplomatic communication in the 21st century, where they said that, you know, diplomacy is entering an age of e-diplomacy. Historically, governments left diplomacy to the cagey and the discreet, who mostly met behind closed doors. Now they're also using Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and local social media services such as China's Weibo. And with so many tweeting Talleyrand's, there is always danger of e-diplomatic incidents as well. Tweeting Talleyrand's, they mean, you know, there was a French diplomat back in the 19th century called Talleyrand, and they mean, you know, he met people behind closed doors. But now the Talleyrand's, the diplomats of the 21st century, are tweeting publicly and openly. And that means that also they might make more mistakes. Tom Fletcher, an English diplomat, formed the concept of naked diplomacy and the naked diplomat to describe the same phenomenon. He explained that a naked diplomat is pared back, simplified, and focused on the essential essence of the job. And the naked diplomat needs a smartphone and the oldest diplomatic attributes, thick skin and an open mind. So let's talk a little bit more about naked diplomacy. Why does social media matter? Why do we care about the fact that, you know, there are now so many social media platforms and we're moving to an age of electronic media? Well, one issue is that everyone is in social media. It's easy for us to approach our target audience through social media platforms. You know, if an embassy puts up something on their website, we wouldn't reach a lot of people. But if we go to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, we would reach the people that we want to reach much more easily. Also, we can sometimes communicate with other diplomats through social media in a simplified way. Also, social media is easy to use. Don't ask a diplomat to update a website. That's usually beyond our IT skills. But you know, anyone can use Twitter or Facebook. Even my grandparents know how to use those platforms. Also, social media are cost effective. Many governments, including my government, are facing cost-back measures. The coronavirus pandemic is making it even harder to find government funding for diplomacy. So that's why we have to resort to options that don't cost us as much. And you don't need any money to open a Facebook account. You don't need money to open a Twitter account. So that's why we are also on social media. Also, social media helps us be prepared for many kinds of issues. I was talking to another diplomat about the issue of the Arab Spring that happened in North Africa and the Middle East. And he was saying that, you know, because he was back then stationed in one of the countries where this happened and where the uprising happened. And he was saying that he would always go to the government briefings. He would read the big newspapers there. And all the government officials, they would say, don't worry, the situation is under control. But actually, when you went to social media, you could see that people were upset. They were tweeting, they were publishing posts against the government, and you could see these things being trending topics in local social media. So, you know, in order to understand what happens beyond maybe the government and beyond what the foreign government wants us to know, we should be in social media to read these signals. But of course, this doesn't mean that, you know, diplomacy is changing totally. I would say that the role of social media is not to reinvent diplomacy, but rather it's to add to it. It adds another component. It changes it a little bit, but not entirely. Also, there are so many social media platforms that it would be hard for us to know which one to follow. We have Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, WeChat, Weibo, YouTube, SlideShare, Periscope, Clubhouse, and so on. So, so that means that it's somehow also making maybe diplomacy a bit harder, because you have to fine-tune your message to different platforms. You have to know which ones to use in which countries, and so on and so forth. Another issue with social media is that we have to understand whether we should be there as an organization or as an individual. There are different practices in different organizations. Some ministries, some organizations say that, oh, you know, you're not allowed to be there at all. Don't be there with your own name, at least. Others say that, yes, social media is something that you should be in and you should invest your time in it, and so on. So what I would argue, based on what I've read and what I've seen, is that, you know, when you operate in social media, the best way is to do it as in a personal capacity, as an expert representing the organization, or maybe just as a private individual. And that's because personal accounts, they usually have more impact than organizational accounts, because people trust people. And what I mean by that is that, you know, if you see, let's say you see a company publishing a post or a tweet about a new beer, they would say, oh, this beer tastes very good and you can keep it cold for a very long time, even in the summer. Well, if it comes from an organizational account, you might think, well, they're just saying it because they want to sell that beer, or they're financially invested in it. But if your friend posts and says, hey, I found this new beer in the local shop, and actually it stays cold longer than any other beer that I've tasted and it tastes good, you would probably trust them more likely. And if it comes from an expert, maybe, you know, somebody who has a food blog or something, you might still trust them even though they're not your friends. So that's why I would also say that, yes, we need organizational accounts sometimes, but individual accounts might be better. And also, when you have an account, you should, you know, try to make it as personal as you can. You can, you know, write a bio of yourself. You can find a picture that would appeal to people, because this would encourage people to follow you as an individual person, and they would be interested in your passions as well. And next, I would like to give a couple of examples of diplomacy in the age of social media. Here we have two recent tweets by the Finnish Foreign Ministry. They are both about Turkey. The lower tweet, the older one, is a tweet that says that FM Haavisto, so our Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto, is giving a statement. Turkey's decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention is deeply regrettable. The convention is meant to prevent violence against women and ensure legal protection for victims of domestic violence. We need more international cooperation against these crimes, not less. I think most of you remember that day, Friday evening on March the 19th this year, when we heard that President Erdogan had decided that Turkey will withdraw from the Istanbul Convention. When we saw the news, we knew that we have to respond somehow. So the next morning, on Saturday morning, our team in Helsinki, in the headquarters, in the minister's cabinet, convened. Also, we in Ankara, we came back to the office to see what we can do, what is happening, what is the media saying, and so on. and our team also at the delegation for the Council of Europe met and started discussing it. And we knew that, okay, we have to go public, we have to say something about it, because the Istanbul Convention is an important thing for Finland, and it's an important thing for the whole world. And we also knew that we have to do it fast, because nowadays media travels fast and people's interests change fast. And if you go there and if you publish your statement after everybody else, nobody will listen to you anymore. Nobody will care. So we drafted this and we sent it out as one of the first countries actually to do so. And then during that day, we saw a lot of similar tweets from other countries as well. And personally, I'm quite happy with this one. In hindsight, you know, because social media happens fast, we don't have maybe enough time sometimes to think about all the wordings. Here, for example, we say at the end, we need more international cooperation against these crimes, not less. Well, you know, international cooperation, it's a nice word, but it's a word that oftentimes governments which do not want to join binding conventions or standards use. Because cooperation is a little bit fluffy term. It can mean a little bit anything. You can say that, oh, we're cooperating when we're talking, even though we don't, you know, practice something. So maybe in hindsight, if we had had more time, we could have thought about the wording and maybe said, we need more international standards against these crimes, not less. The other example from April, Foreign Minister Haavisto is saying that he had substantive phone discussion with Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu on issues like Ukraine, Afghanistan, Horn of Africa, and whatnot. And also, he again expressed disappointment in Turkey's decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention. It is quite a nice tweet. We use hashtags, we tag someone else. There are even a couple of emojis, so quite good. With this one, again, you know, our communications teams discussed what should be said, what should the foreign minister say. And finally, it's always the foreign minister who decides if this is okay and if this is what he wants to say. Here, I think at one point, somebody was saying that, oh, it was a very frank discussion. Good that we had it, good that the ministers had this frank discussion. And I think at one point, maybe in the tweet, somebody was thinking of writing frank discussion. But of course, in the language of diplomacy, you know, frank may not mean exactly what it means to us. So when diplomats say frank discussion, it usually means that we are arguing about something. So thank goodness we chose a word substantive, which is a bit more neutral. Next example, again, as I said before, diplomacy has happened in, you know, behind the scenes traditionally. It's a very restricted sphere of activity. But then again, today, we have so many reality TV series. If you go to Netflix, you would find all these Desperate Housewives of New York or series like Selling Sunset and whatnot. There are so many reality TV series also in Turkey. And actually, diplomats are now joining these kind of series as well. One good example is I Am the Ambassador. I won't even try to pronounce the Danish version of it, but it's a Danish TV series that follows the American ambassador in Copenhagen and his life. It's interesting in many ways because it actually shows you how much planning goes into diplomacy. It shows what diplomats do on a day-to-day basis. It's not all about cocktail parties, but it's hard work. Oftentimes, you know, we go to the office at 7 a.m. We would leave the office at 7 p.m. and we would still, you know, attend one reception. And then we would go back home at 9, 10 p.m., read the news, check our email in bed, and then go to sleep. Also, these kind of reality TV series can be indirect ways to promote your country's interests. For example, in this TV series, we follow an American ambassador who is actually married to another man. And I think through the TV series, they tried to highlight also Obama administration. So this happened during the Obama administration, and they tried to highlight the the pro-LGBTQ policies of the previous administration. And, you know, there's actually also an academic paper about this TV series where, interestingly, the writers are saying that diplomacy, just like reality television, is a blend of reality and illusion, wherein the actors are constrained by a complex formula that dictates how they're expected to perform. So this refers to all the protocol and all the issues of codification that I discussed. At the end of my presentation today, I'll give you the whole reference. So if you want to go and check that paper, please feel free to do so. If you can't find it online, if your school doesn't have access to it, just email me and I'll be happy to send it to you as well. The third example is street naming. This is an interesting example and a modern example of diplomatic communication that happens not only in social media, but has a social media aspect to it as well. In early 2018, I guess many of you remember that that Turkey had a military operation in Syria. That military operation was called Olive Branch. And actually the United States openly opposed to it. Turkey was not very happy about it. And actually after this operation, Turkey renamed the street outside US Embassy Olive Branch Street. Well, I guess our American colleagues maybe were not very happy about it, but they didn't care that much because the US Embassy was about to move anyways. They're building now a new compound quite close to Armada in Ankara. But then in October 2018, Turkey decided to also rename the street outside the new compound, and they chose the name Malcolm X. And of course, Malcolm X is quite a radical human rights fighter. He was a radical human rights fighter who divides opinion even in the US. And at that time, international media was thinking that, okay, Turkey is doing this because they want to upset the US. They want to send a signal. But the American embassy in Ankara did something quite funny. They turned all that publicity into their favor. And instead of opposing this, instead of saying that, like, why is Turkey doing this or whatnot, they actually published a tweet saying that, with my free translation, it would be one of the streets near the construction site of the new embassy compound was named Malcolm X. And Malcolm X was the leader of the struggle for freedom, justice, and equality for many Americans. So this is how they actually changed all that publicity into their favor. And even this year, during the Black Pride month, they use this as an example also that, hey, we will be situated in the near future on Malcolm X Street, and that's an honor. And of course, there are many, many more examples. Sometimes street naming is used as a tool of positive diplomacy. For example, Baku Sokak, Beyaz Zambaklar, which refers to Finland and which Turkey gave as a birthday gift to Finland when we turned 100 as an independent nation. Jinnah, referring to the founder of Pakistan, Philistine, that refers to Palestine, which Turkey is one of the states that recognizes Palestine. Unfortunately, many countries don't yet recognize the Palestinians' independence, but Turkey shows this through the example as well of street naming that they do recognize it: Iran, Paris, Tehran, and so on. If you're interested in street naming, actually, I, together with two great young Turkish scholars, published a journal paper about this topic in Geopolitics earlier this year. So I will give you the reference. And again, if you want to read the paper, just email me and I can send it to you as well. And then one more example of nonverbal communication, the sofa gate. I guess you have all heard about it. In April 2021, two high-ranking EU officials came to Turkey, the president of the Commission and the president of the Council, and they met with President Erdogan. But actually in that meeting, there were only two chairs, as you can see. So the council president, Charles Michel, sat in that chair, leaving no chair for the commission president, Ursula von der Leyen, and she was quite upset about it, which you could see if you check the memes, if you check the videos, you could see that she was actually quite upset about this. So you can go and check that. It's an interesting sample. And it shows also that, you know, you can send, of course, I'm not privy to all the conversation that happened behind the scenes. Turkey actually quite quickly, Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu said that actually this was what the European Union protocol was asking us to do. And then some were saying, oh, this is a way, like, why are you being chauvinistic? Why don't you give a seat to the female leader and whatnot? But this also showed that, you know, things get public much more easily today in the age of digital and social media. But then again, I mean, that sofa where von der Leyen sits, it's not a bad seat. When our ambassador met with President Erdogan, I was seated there, so I think it's a good seat as well. Okay, so these are some of the examples of diplomatic communication in the age of social media. And in the last part of my presentation, I would like to then give some examples on how to communicate effectively in diplomacy. I draw a lot from our foreign ministry's guidelines, as well as from communications classes from Puhe Production, a Finnish media company that has very good classes on communication. So let's start with social media communication. Here are some examples of how to communicate in diplomacy effectively. Of course, you can use these ones beyond diplomacy in all kinds of business communications and even private communications. So try to talk about your meetings and praise the people you have met. This is because this creates goodwill. And also, you know, if you tag other people, they might share your news, which is good, so you get more publicity. Also, try to make known how hard your organization works. This, for example, what the TV series I Am the Ambassador did in Denmark and the US. And then again, as I said before, try to add your personal touch. Try to make the tweet or the social media post more personal. And also when you have a link, try to make it interesting. Try to say something that makes people click that link. So instead of saying that, for example, well, I give an example because now I've been hand washing my clothes for 3 weeks in this hotel room. So instead of saying using detergent will help you get your clothes cleaner and then giving a link to 10 tips on how to wash clothes, you can say, I never knew that there is this trick to making your clothes clean. So then people could go and click that link, try to see, well, how do I actually clean my clothes? And of course, tweets with images and all kinds of social media posts with images, videos, and GIFs tend to perform better than those without them. This is actually based on research. So try to add more pictures to your social media posts, even if it's not on Instagram or TikTok, even if you're tweeting or sending Facebook posts, that's always a good thing. And how do you actually produce an interesting message? Well, you should choose a useful or necessary topic, something that people need to know about. But at the same time, usually it helps to have topics that do not threaten the listener's worldview. That doesn't always work. For example, in China, our embassy might need to post issues on the Xinjiang Uyghurs. And the Chinese audience, many members may not agree on the European Union or the Finnish standpoint on this, but sometimes we have to do it. But you have to also add topics that do not threaten the listener's worldview, because then they would be interested in them. And then that would create goodwill with them. So in addition to these kind of topics, a little bit more sensitive topics, you can add something more positive about, for example, in Turkish social media, we can post articles or issues about how many people study Turkish in Finland, or during the holy month of Ramadan, we posted a link and a post about how Finnish Muslims celebrate Ramadan, and told that actually Finland has also a Muslim community, even though we are not known about it. Then try to add familiar or close topics. If you choose topics that people are interested in or familiar with, they might click the links, they might be more interested in reading them. For example, I'm an architectural geographer by training, so whenever I see any post about architecture, I would go and click them. And then definitely new and timely topics. As I was explaining with the Istanbul Convention tweet, you have to be fast in the new social media. And then finally, a couple of examples on how to prepare, especially for interview situations. Because as diplomats, you get interviewed. Sometimes it's a public interview for example, for a newspaper or for a website. But then sometimes you might actually need, for example, you can go to a school visit or a university visit. So here are a couple of tips how to prepare. And you can all use them even if you're not a diplomat. So how would you avoid some mistakes that an unprepared person would do? Try to always be prepared when you go to a situation. Try to discuss the matter and the background with the other party beforehand, so that you really understand what you're supposed to speak about on that day. Try to prepare your own key messages. One communications trainer once told me that you should always have 3 key messages. I don't think it's that strict, but try to keep it short. I would say from maybe 2 to 5 issues, because people won't remember if you have too many topics. You can try them and test them with a colleague. Sometimes it's actually better to test them with someone who is not in your line of industry. For example, for me, I would test them with a friend who's not a diplomat, because we have a lot of jargon that we use and people wouldn't maybe understand it. And make sure that at least your core facts are right. So if you have, for example, numbers or terminology, make sure that you know what you're talking about. Make sure that you know, for example, if I needed to give an interview about Syrian refugees in Turkey, I should at least check how many are there today in Turkey? Is it 3 million, 4 million, 4.5, or what is it? And maybe also like what the European Union says about it and what the Turkish side says about it. Also, how can you pass on the information you have and keep the facts right? I think it's always good to start from a micro level, something that you can identify with, and then go to the macro level. So you can start from the topic on, for example, if you're talking about how much money the refugee crisis spend, or how much money are we spending on the refugee crisis, instead of saying that, oh, we're talking about certain billions. And again, today I should have maybe fact checked this before I come here, if I had known that I'm going to talk about this topic. But I'll give you an example. So instead of saying that, oh, we're spending this and this many billions in it, you can say that, well, per taxpayer, we're paying this much. So then people would identify, okay, I'm paying that much from my own pocket. That's also about proportions. It's good to give examples. I remember I was talking with a journalist about the new sea connection from China to the Netherlands, which goes through the North Sea instead of the Indian Ocean. And I was giving an example that, because actually ships, the new route is faster. So each container ship, they would save up to 2 million Turkish liras for each leg. So I was saying that each time a ship takes that way instead of the Indian Ocean, they save enough money to buy actually a nice 1-bedroom apartment in Helsinki. So then people can identify with this topic much more easily. And that's also an example of comparing it to something else. Also, how should you react if the other side asks questions that are not very relevant? Well, I think you should always take the other side seriously. That's because most of the time they are sincere. They actually think that way for some reasons, and take their questions seriously. Also, you don't have to come up with a story if you don't have any background in the story. Just tell them what you know. And if you don't have an answer, you can always say that, I'm sorry, I don't know that exactly, but hey, let me get back to you on it. Also, it's sometimes good to pause a little bit, talk slower than you would normally, because when you get a little bit excited, when you get a little bit nervous, you tend to speak faster than normal. And again, if the other side introduce a topic that's not relevant to what you were supposed to discuss, you can try to reintroduce a more essential topic instead. And never be provoked, never be rude, never walk out of an interview situation. I've seen that happening, not so much with diplomats, but we have seen that happening even with the previous president of the US. And try to stay in your own role. You don't have to be anyone else. We are all individuals. We have our own strengths and our own weaknesses. But I think when I'm listening to someone or seeing someone, I want to see them as who they are rather than as, a stereotypical diplomat or whatnot. And also, how can you convey the right message with your outfit, posture, and gestures? Well, try to stay relaxed, try to be positive, and use your personality. You can also show expressions and gestures. I know that in some countries, people tend to, being a stereotype or not, for example, Italians, they do a lot of hand gestures. The Japanese may not do that. So you don't also have to do it, but if that's part of who you are, why not? Try to speak like you're talking to another person, not to a big audience, but identify someone in the audience, or try to be like you're talking to a friend. Also try to listen, try to answer questions. So listen to what the other side is saying, and don't pressure yourself too much. What's the worst thing that can happen? That's usually how I'm thinking about a situation like, there's nothing so bad that I can say. I can't make such a big mistake. Just, if I don't know the answer, I just say I don't know it. And try not to do anything in a hurry. So if somebody asks you to give an interview, what we at the embassy would normally do is that, okay, thanks, that's very, very, very interesting suggestion. Let me get back to you on that. Please give me your contact details. So I'll get back to you within today and let you know when I can do the interview, instead of giving it on the spot, especially if I don't have all the background facts. So in conclusion, as I said in the beginning, communication is something we all do at all times. Diplomacy itself is a form of communication. It's about relations between states or political units, and relations are pretty much handled through communication. Then there is an issue of continuity versus change. We have on the one hand continuity in diplomacy, as I said, and then we have change. And I would say that the role of social media is not to reinvent diplomacy, but it adds a new essential component to it, which helps diplomats to work in the 21st century. And in conclusion, in the words of Tom Fletcher, the naked diplomat needs a smartphone and those oldest diplomatic attributes, thick skin and an open mind. So that's all I actually wanted to say today about the topic. But I have a few readings here. I already mentioned Naked Diplomacy. Very good book, very nicely written, not too academic, I would say. So you can go and borrow that from the library. There's a little bit old academic article, Communication, an Essential Aspect of Diplomacy, which was written before Twitter and Facebook became big things, but they still talk about the change quite interestingly. And then we have the article about the reality TV series that I mentioned, as well as Onat Nureshen and my article on assembling a critical toponymy of diplomacy, so about diplomatic street naming. And again, if you're interested in these articles or you want to ask something more, you can always email me. My email address is timo.sysio@formin.fi. And you can also find me on Twitter. I don't tweet that actively, but I have now started it because, you know, I should practice what I teach in a way. But now we still have plenty of time for Q&A. I saw somebody raising a hand as well, so I'll be very happy to answer any questions that you might have and continue this discussion with you.
Yes, all right. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Sysio. It was really, really interesting and very fruitful, I think. As I see, there are a lot of questions on our chat screen now. Maybe I can read it to you loudly, then other participants would also hear the questions.
Okay.
I think about these street names. Is it normal in other countries to name streets after the embassies that they are located in? Or maybe Turkey invented it to lure embassies from Istanbul to Ankara?
That's actually a very good question. And definitely Turkey had different kind of strategies to get embassies from Istanbul to Ankara back in the 1930s when Ankara became the capital. And street naming, it's quite specific to Ankara. So there are a lot of examples from Ankara, but it happens elsewhere as well. For example, a street outside the Russian embassy in the Washington, D.C., if I don't remember incorrectly, was also named in opposition of Russia, actually, it was named after a Russian opposition fighter. We have a street of, we have many examples of, for example, streets in Paris. We have Place de Finlande, named after Finland when our president went to Paris and whatnot. But I would say that I don't have statistics on this, but you have a point there, because I do think that Ankara has more streets named after different countries than many other places.
Oh, all right. Yes. And one more, and not only the social media users, but also the social media companies themselves can affect the political and diplomatic communications. Twitter banning the account of Donald Trump is an example. Do you think states are concerned because of this scenario? What do you think would be the measures could be taken by the states?
This is an issue. Definitely. It's an issue, and I think it's something that we're still trying to balance, because social media is something that we are learning on a day-to-day basis. So this is actually a very good point. For me, it's a timely topic as well, because I'm moving to China. And of course, you know that many social media platforms are forbidden in China. I can't use Twitter, I can't use Facebook, and those platforms that our ministry normally would use. So of course, we would like to see social media as open as possible, but at the same time, the problem with very open media is that, you know, how do you control, for example, fake news? So I think nobody has yet found the balance, the best balance, and this is something that I think we should all work on and come up with examples and come up with measures that, you know, would safeguard us from fake news, but at the same time, make social media as open as possible.
All right. Thank you very much. We have a similar question, and I think you already answered it, and I pass it. There's a comment and a question at the same time. All these points feel like this is a presentation on how to manipulate people. In daily life, how much of these points do you consciously use? Do you manage to keep these tips only on professional communications?
Well, as I said in the beginning, indeed, we are trying to manipulate people. I have to be honest about it. I'm not sure if our communications department would say that, but yeah, much of diplomatic communication, much of communication overall is about manipulation. But manipulation maybe also in a positive sense, as in trying to change your opinion about certain issues, and maybe also sometimes trying to rectify misconceptions about different countries. But yes, indeed, through social media, we're trying to, you know, create a more positive image of Finland so that, you know, we would achieve other political objectives. And all countries do it. Luckily, you know, I feel like I'm working for a government whose principles I can agree on. And that's why when I'm posting issues on social media in a professional capacity, I stand by it. But I would imagine that there are also colleagues working for governments whose policies they may not always agree on. And even for me, I don't always agree 100% with all the policies that our government makes. But again, it's a balance that you have to achieve in your professional life.
You're definitely right. Thank you. And one more question, which is mine, but I also posted it here. Disinformation has influenced all areas of 21st century political communication. As we see from your presentation, diplomacy is no exception, right? I'd like to ask, what are the potential harms of social media platforms to diplomatic communication? I mean, how diplomats can understand and counter the new uncertainty of this disinformation, and how they would cope with the issue of false stories spreading about their country's politics, and unfortunately, how they would manage the rumor-driven cases about their countries in social media.
Well, I think so. Media professionals often hear this phrase, "All publicity is good publicity." I wouldn't always agree with that. Definitely no. But what we try to do, and what our principle is, that, you know, oftentimes under tweets or under social media posts, we would also get some negative comments. Today, I actually saw an article I think it was in The Economist, talking about Finnish education system, and I saw some negative tweets as well, saying that, oh, you know, it's easy to do that if you have enough money, or saying that, oh, they're not actually as good as country X or country Y, or all these kind of issues. So yeah, there are negative comments that come. Normally, I wouldn't start deleting them. Sometimes people would do them in anger, and if I start responding to all the comments, you know, it would just increase the anger. But that's but I would try, if I can, somehow take people's opinions seriously and try and answer when a comment is made in a way that is not mean, but is critical. And then if somebody says something that is, you know, I would consider that it's out of line, I might message them privately rather than leave it out in the open. I have, for example, I remember occasions when Finland Finland elected a new female-led government, and we got some comments about women not being able to lead because they're women, so they're like a lesser gender. And I thought that that's very backward. It's not something that we can stand by and whatnot. And but then, because the comments, they were written in a way that was not as diplomatic as I put it here, so rather than putting it out in the open, I did message that individual personally and send some facts about this issue as well.
All right, thank you. And one more, is the use of social media altering the norm of traditional diplomacy?
This is something that, you know, yes and no. It depends on how you define diplomacy. I would take quite a broad definition. It's about relations between political units. And this is how we practice relations today. But definitely, if you look into diplomatic protocols, if you look into Vienna Convention of diplomacy, you wouldn't see much about social media, because those conventions and those protocols were agreed on before the age of social media. So we have to adapt to the new age. So I would say they are definitely part of diplomacy, and they need to be part of diplomacy, and they are there to stay. But we also, you know, need to maybe one day update our conventions and our norms and our codes of conduct with other countries when it comes to social media and the use of new media as a mode of communication. For example, I give one example, which is verbal notes. Mostly we communicate with verbal notes still today, but increasingly, especially with countries that we're very close to, instead of sending verbal notes, we would send emails more easily. We would even send messages on WhatsApp or a Signal or whatnot. But those ones are not official modes of communication. But we should start maybe, today accept these as a means of communication in diplomacy as well, because at the end of the day, the age of verbal notes in many respects has passed.
Yes, thank you. I think the same participant asked the same question, but he said diplomacy. I think he's talking about Twitter diplomacy. Okay, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. My question is, how diplomats handle trolls on social media?
Very good question, very good question. You get a lot of troll messages. I've been, not so much our embassy, but let's say sometimes you would get it topic to topic. Our foreign ministry account might get them. Big countries get them more than medium or small size countries, definitely. And it's a problem. We have tools. Some tools are not public, but we have people following these issues. And if we can find a source of these trolls, we would try to approach relevant authorities and handle it. But then there are issues, for example, of our accounts sometimes being hacked. Our accounts being used for, when they've been hacked, they have spread news that are not true. So in these kind of occasions, we have a protocol what to do. For example, if your account gets hacked, or if they create an account which is very similar with almost the same name, you publish a statement as soon as possible saying that that's not the official account. You ask the social media provider to close that account. And if somebody hacks your account, you will again approach the social media provider. You would change your email addresses. You would change your phone numbers. And these are something that you should do not only when you're a diplomat or you're the administrator of a public social media account, but also as an individual if your account gets hacked, because that happens. And also sometimes we would get trolls who follow, especially KOLs, so people who are individuals but have a lot of social media followers.
Yeah, all right. Okay. Another question. This is a little bit personal. What are some diplomacy lessons you learn in Ankara for your future roles?
That's actually a very funny, very interesting question, because I was writing, in our foreign service, we have something that we call it, the name sounds a bit bad, it's called testament, but it's something that you write to your successor. So when you're leaving a position, you would write 4 or 5 pages of A4 about what you've learned, what your successor should do, and what you might do differently. For me, definitely there are many lessons that I can draw from Ankara. Unfortunately, my time here was mainly COVID time, so it was something new for all of us. For me, what I learned was that we were not prepared. In terms of our communication, for example, we were not prepared for this kind of pandemic and this scale of it. So when I go to Beijing, I think I want to be even more prepared, even more organized in a way that, you can't plan. Nobody knew that this kind of pandemic would happen, but it's always good to, have something in writing, have some templates, and, be ready for things when they happen. Be ready to answer all kind of inquiries, have lists of people to approach, have journalists to approach, and also to communicate. In addition to communicating publicly, I've noticed that it's very important to communicate with your colleagues, especially with the like-minded countries. I've learned that they are very helpful. We can talk about many issues with them, and they face similar challenges as we do. So that kind of internal communication or network communication with diplomats is important. And also, issues are much more easily handled when you have a personal connection to other people. That's also true with Turkish diplomats, with the Turkish Foreign Ministry, with the Turkish Ministry of Trade, and whatnot. I've met many capable people. I mean, it's very hard to become a Turkish diplomat. they have a small intake, they have a very hard exam and whatnot. So people that you meet in the ministry, you know, they are nice, smart people, but then if you communicate only formally, if you don't meet them personally, if you don't create that kind of first name basis connection, things are slower when you actually need their help. So I think that try to get personal, so to speak, try to create your network and try to, you know, meet people, especially in the beginning, a lot.
Yes, thank you. Do we have any other questions or addings? Yes, İlki Hocam, please.
I couldn't find the raise your hand button.
No, I
Maybe
can
it's
see.
because I am the co-host. Sorry. I would like to thank you for your very informing and insightful presentation. And what was in my mind is, I think under the verbal notes, you say that you rely heavily on custom. So my question is that, do you think that a custom has been also emerging in diplomacy, also in relation to social media communication?
I think,
thank you.
Yeah, very good question. You know, social media and it came, we were not prepared for it, I would say. And I can see that, for example, on our Facebook sites, you know, when Facebook started, I think nobody understood how big it will become. Now some people might say that it's a bit passé, but, you know, let's say 5, 10 years ago, especially, it was very big. We didn't understand that 15 or 20 years ago. And that's why, you know, the foreign ministry and our embassies, we didn't go to Facebook in the very beginning. And when we started going, it was like some countries, some embassies thinking that, okay, we should go. So they started accounts and they named them as they wanted. And now when we see Finnish embassy accounts, they come under many, I'm sorry, that bell, if you can hear, is my dinner, but I can wait, I can leave it outside. They will leave it outside. No worries about that. So what I was saying was that, yeah, we went to Facebook with many different kind of names. So we named embassies. Some might be Finland in Turkey. Some might be Finnish embassy in Ankara. Some might be Ambassade de Finland and whatnot. So you change. So we were not prepared. And now if we did that today, I think our ministry would be more organized and we would name them all the same way. That's what we did with our Facebook sites. And that's what you can see now when I'm seeing new social media platforms coming up, for example, in China. I can see that the names of foreign missions, for example, they have been more, you know, standardized. And so I think, yes, new customs, new forms of communication, for example, how do you communicate with different foreign ministers are coming about. But it's taking time. And at the same time, when we're learning how to use platforms like Facebook or Twitter in social media, new platforms like Clubhouse already emerge, and then we're not prepared for that. So I think the change is also faster than ever before, which makes it harder as well.
Thank you. Do we have any other question or addings? One participant raised his hand, but I think he already wrote his question on the chat place, right?
Yes,
I think so. Yes, I think so. I saw his name. Okay, then. Thank you very much for your kind and interesting presentation, and for our we thank all our participants for their patience and presence here. We again thank to Dr. İlke Göçmen and my colleagues here in ATAUM. So hope all of us get the golden points from the lecture and get the importance of diplomacy in the social media age in order to have a peaceful world. We wish you a healthy life and all the best. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much. It has been a pleasure, and I wish you all a great summer and a good weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you a lot. So see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.